Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of Git Gud at OpenRCT2 2. In an earlier episode I showed you how to build a realistic looking air-powered vertical coaster based on Deurklink or Hypersonic XLC. If you haven't seen that one, I recommend watching it first. I will link to that video in the description of this video. Anyway, I saw that some people are struggling to build a good layout for these kinds of coasters. So in this video I will show you some tips and tricks to help you build one of these. Now, first things first, the layout of these rides. For the layout of an air-launched vertical coaster, you should ask yourself what sets these rides apart from other rides. The answer to this is their acceleration. Deurklink, or Deurklink as it is called now, which still operates to this day, is the coaster with the highest acceleration in the world. People have described it as getting hit in the back by a truck, and apparently that is really enjoyable. The cars on these rides even have big rubber wheels to cope with the high speed and acceleration of these rides. When you build one of these, you should give them a fast launch. Of course, with these high speeds, you should not make your track too complicated. Typically these rides have very wide turns and only shallow hills and drops, except for the big top hat or giant loop that it reaches at some point in the layout. When I make hills or drops on these tracks, I usually do so in the diagonal sections, because there you can make them nice and shallow. For the top hat of this ride, if you make one, you should try to make it nice and high, so it becomes a focus of attention in the park. For the top hats, I like to decorate them using towers from a launched freefall ride. In my opinion, they look best with a 2-tile gap between the towers. You should avoid making the top hat too narrow or too wide. Speaking of layouts, I have seen some people make one of these and put all kinds of different inversions on the track. Well, first of all, these trains only have sprites for loops, so it will just pass through other inversions in a silly looking way. Other than that, inversions are usually made to be traversed at a lower speed, which is not something you should go for when making one of these. Instead of inversions, another way to make these rides look more impressive is by making them interact with other rides. Even a log flume becomes much more nerve-wracking if one of these trains speed by at over 100 km per hour. You could also make some paths under the track at some point in the layout, which will allow your guests a good view of the ride. Another important aspect of the ride, which I have seen people do some weird things with, is the launch. For a compressed air launch, a catch car which is under the coaster is launched using compressed air. For this, the coaster needs to be standing still first. I have seen some people use a triple launch for this ride, but that would not work for an air-launched coaster. Typically, I simply launch the coaster directly from the station, using the powered launch mode, because it gives an almost instant acceleration to the desired speed. When I do this, I usually cover the station and the first part of the track, to pretend the coaster is actually launched from a launch track in front of the station. If you first want your coaster to slowly drive to a launch track, or if you first want it to turn, then a launch using a chain lift is probably your best bet. Using the Unlock Operating Limits cheat, you can set your chain lifts to very high speeds. Boosted track pieces are probably best avoided, since they use the linear synchronous motors in their sprites, unless you choose to hide them, of course. To hide booster pieces, you can simply make them invisible using corrupt elements, and then replace them with normal track pieces. I typically build the normal track pieces in the other direction, to prevent them from merging with the original boosted track while building. Anyway, those were my tips and tricks for this episode. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask them in the comments or on my Discord channel. A link to my Discord channel can be found in the description of this video. Alright, that was it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and I will see you again in the next one. See you later.